The sheriff told me to step away from the lake I'd fished on for 23 years, and Margaret Wyndham stood behind him smiling like she'd finally broken me. What she didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that by the end of this story, that same woman would be running out of a county building in humiliation, because I'd prove in front of everyone that the lake she tried to control didn't just belong to me a little bit. I owned the whole damn thing. I'm Theo Blackstone, and this is the story of how one HOA Karen tried to erase my life, my memories and my home until she pushed just a little too far. I moved to Pine Ridge Lake in '99 after my wife Sarah passed. Cancer, 48 years old, too young, too unfair, too fast. I needed quiet, real quiet, the kind only water and pine trees can give. My granddad left me this 2-acre slice of land with a hand-drawn map, a weathered deed, and a simple message. Keep it peaceful, kid. So I built the cabin myself, every board, every nail. Busy hands make a hurting heart quiet down at least for a while. Fishing at dawn became therapy. Same spot, same crunch of gravel under my boots, same mist drifting across the lake like soft ghosts. That routine is what kept me sane. Nobody ever bothered me. For 23 years, this place was a community of simple people, teachers, veterans, retirees, who spent more time fixing each other's porches than complaining about them. And then came the gentrification wave. McMansions started popping up like weeds, and with them came newcomers who thought pine needles on a driveway were a crisis. The worst of them, Margaret Wyndham, fresh from Atlanta, freshly divorced, freshly inflated ego. She rolled in with a white BMW designer sunglasses and that stiff helmet hair bob that screams, "I've never once been told no." 2 weeks after arriving, she didn't bake cookies or introduce herself. She organized a concerned homeowners meeting. Her pitch, Pine Ridge Lake, desperately needed an HOA for safety and property values. She had PowerPoint slides, color-coded charts, phrases like recreational liability management. It was like watching a corporate takeover of a neighborhood. She targeted everything that made this place feel like home docks, that had been there longer than she'd been alive, fishing access paths, even Betty Kowalski's garden gnome collection. But the real kicker was when she claimed the entire lake was a community asset and demanded every household pay $200 per month to use it. I told her politely, "Ma'am, I'm not interested in joining your HOA." Her voice turned colder than January ice. "It's not optional, Mr. Blackstone. This affects everyone's investment." I told her I don't have investments. I have a home. She hung up on me. Next day, laminated signs popped up around the lake, HOA property, members only, shiny and arrogant like her. I ignored them. This was my routine, my peace. But Margaret stationed herself at her window with binoculars, snapping pictures like she was documenting wildlife or a criminal. And one morning she finally snapped. I'm standing there at sunrise, just casting my line, when a deputy walks down the path looking more embarrassed than authoritative. "Theo," she filed a complaint, "says you're trespassing on HOA waters. I'm supposed to ask you to leave." Behind him, Margaret stood smugly with her arms crossed, wearing a pastel cardigan and a smile sharp enough to slice through bone. I packed my tackle box quietly, but something inside me cracked like that snapping latch. 23 years of peace evaporated because of a woman who moved in 6 months ago and decided she owned everything she could see. But I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the lake boundaries weren't what I thought. Maybe I'd forgotten something in the deed. I'm not too proud to admit it. I went home feeling shaken, old tired. For the first time I wondered, did I really have the right to be here? My doubts didn't last long because Margaret escalated faster than a rocket strapped to caffeine. Within 48 hours, she sent violation letters to half the neighborhood. Betty's Gnomes, aesthetic violations, $50 per day. Frank's walking path, unauthorized use of HOA land. My dock, unpermitted structure. She even hired a kid as security to photograph anyone fishing. HOA in her mind meant dictatorship. I decided if she wanted a war of paperwork, I'd fight it with facts, so I drove down to the county courthouse. The building smelled like old coffee and old paper, the kind of place where time gets sticky. There I met Joyce Miller, a clerk who's probably forgotten more property law than most attorneys ever learn. She looked at Margaret's HOA filing and snorted. "This paperwork's messier than a soup sandwich," she said. "Missing surveys, missing legal authority, missing half the requirements." Margaret's HOA was about as valid as a kid's lemonade stand license. But Margaret didn't stop. She sent a cease and desist letter through an attorney, a thick envelope full of legal jargon demanding $500 in administrative fees. I was helping Betty fix her porch step when the letter arrived. She read it over my shoulder, her hands shaking. "Theo, how can she do this?" I didn't know. But I knew one thing: bullies don't stop when you ignore them. They stop when you pull the rug out from under their feet. That's when things got strange. A surveyor I hired, Jake Patterson, came by to map my property. He kept checking his equipment, scratching his head, walking the same 30 feet of shoreline again and again. Theo, looks like your land goes 30 feet into the lake." Then I found an anonymous note in my mailbox. "Check Thompson Mining Company records. State Archives." That night I sat in my cabin staring at the lake. I felt old, beaten down, like maybe this was all too big for me. Margaret had money, power, influence. She had people scared. And here I was, one guy with an old cabin, a fishing rod, and a box of memories. I thought about selling the place, walking away, starting new somewhere else. I'll admit it, I was close to giving up. But then I remembered Sarah, and my grandfather, and all the mornings I'd stood at that shoreline feeling alive for the first time in years. I decided I wasn't backing down, not yet. 3 days later, I drove to the state archives and dug through mining records from the 1940s. The old papers were brittle-yellowed, curled at the edges, but what I found made my heart beat thunder. Thompson Mining Company didn't just buy mineral rights, they bought the entire lake bed. And in 1958, my grandfather bought it from them lock, stock, and reservoir. Those rights passed to my father, then to me. I didn't just have permission to fish. I didn't just own shoreline. I owned the entire lake, every drop of water, every inch of lake bottom, every right Margaret claimed as her HOAs. By the time I walked into Attorney Bennett's office, I already knew the truth. He confirmed it. "Mr. Blackstone," he said, spreading out the documents, "every restriction the HOA attempted is illegal. They've been charging people to use private property that belongs to you." Margaret, meanwhile, was planning her victory parade. She organized a giant presentation for the county commissioners. She invited reporters, hired a photographer, gathered 3 other HOA presidents. She was ready to proclaim herself Queen of the Lake. Perfect. The night of the meeting, she strutted into the county building in a cream blazer carrying binders thick enough to serve as body armor. Her supporters wore matching navy jackets like a cult or a discount choir group. She took the podium and launched into a flawless speech. Pictures of me fishing labeled unauthorized commercial activity graphs showing declining property values, charts about safety hazards. She asked the county to grant her HOA full enforcement authority over the lake. People actually applauded. Then the commissioner asked, "Any responses?" I stood up slowly, carrying one manila folder that looked laughably thin next to Margaret's binders. My boots echoed across the floor, each step a countdown to the moment she'd regret ever learning my name. "Commissioners," I said, "I'd like to clarify property ownership." Margaret leaned back smug, fully expecting me to beg. She had no idea the firestorm coming. I pulled out a single certified copy of the 1958 deed and set it on the table. This document shows that my grandfather purchased all mineral and water rights to Pine Ridge Lake. I've paid taxes on the lake for 23 years. I own the lake bottom, the water rights, and every area this HOA claims as common property. The room went still, dead still. Margaret shot to her feet. "That's impossible. We researched ownership." Attorney Bennett rose next, calm as Sunday morning. All rights were inherited legally. Every fine, fee, and restriction imposed by Ms. Wyndham constitutes interference with private property. Joyce stood up too. "Mr. Blackstone has paid lake taxes every year. The HOA is not legally registered with the state. They have no authority." Dale, the treasurer, resigned out loud. "I'm done. I didn't sign up for this nightmare." Within minutes, Margaret's entire narrative collapsed like a cheap folding chair. The county commissioner announced the Pine Ridge Lake HOA has no authority. All structures, fences, and signs must be removed within 72 hours. The sheriff raised a hand. Just so I'm clear, she asked me to arrest a man for trespassing on his own property. Margaret grabbed her purse, shoved past the reporter, and practically sprinted to her BMW. No speech, no celebration, no supporters, just the frantic click of heels retreating into the night. And that right there is where this story ends, because some victories don't need fireworks. Sometimes the real ending is simply watching the person who tried to control everything lose the only power they ever had. And the lesson: know what's yours and don't let anyone steal it just because they say they can. Oh,